Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we journey into the frozen heart of the frozen North, a land of forgotten corners, isolated cabins, endless wilderness, and small settlements buried beneath snow, where help does not reach and winter swallows sound itself. Hidden within these regions are 7 of the most disturbing and terrifying snowbound cabin horror stories ever reported. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of the frozen North, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Elias Korhonen, and this happened during the winter I tried to disappear. I'm not saying that for drama. I was burned out, grieving my father, and angry at a world that wouldn't slow down. So when a coworker mentioned an old family cabin deep in northern Finland, no neighbors, no cell service, surrounded by forest and frozen lakes, I took it as a sign. Solitude was the goal. Silence was the cure. The cabin sat miles from the nearest plowed road. I dragged my supplies on a sled through knee-deep snow, the trees standing like black pillars against a pale sky. When the cabin finally appeared, it looked smaller than the photos, older too. The windows were dark, the wood warped from decades of cold. Still, it felt safe, quiet, like nothing could reach me there. That illusion lasted exactly one night, because just after midnight, when the wind died and the forest went unnaturally still, someone knocked on the cabin door, and whatever it was, knocked back. The knock wasn't loud. That's what unsettled me most. It wasn't a fist slamming wood. It was slow, deliberate, almost polite. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more. I froze on the narrow bed, listening. The old cabin creaked as the fire settled, but outside the forest was silent. No wind, no animals, just that door. I told myself it had to be a branch, snow sliding off the roof, anything but a person, because no one sane would be out there at that hour. Still, I grabbed the flashlight and crept toward the door, my boots scraping softly across the floorboards. "Hello?" I called, my voice thinner than I expected. No answer. I leaned closer, peering through the small window beside the door. The glass was frosted around the edges, but I could see the snow piled high outside, untouched. No footprints, no tracks, nothing that explained the knocking. That's when it happened again. 3 slow taps. This time, from inside the wall behind me. I didn't sleep after that. I sat by the fire until dawn, gripping the axe I'd brought inside for protection, listening to every sound the cabin made. Old wood pops, ice cracking on the lake somewhere beyond the trees. My own breathing, too loud in my ears. When morning came, I convinced myself fear had rewritten the night. I put on my coat and stepped outside to prove it. The cold slapped me awake instantly. Fresh snow had fallen, smoothing the ground into a perfect white sheet. No footprints, not mine, not anyone's. I walked the perimeter of the cabin, checking the walls. The logs were solid, frozen hard as stone. No gaps, no crawl space, no way anything could knock from inside them. I told myself the sound must have traveled through the wood somehow, carried by the cold. That's when I noticed something wrong with the door. On the inside surface, just below the handle, were 3 faint marks pressed into the wood, as if something had knocked. From the other side, I tried leaving that afternoon. That decision should have been simple. Pack up, follow my tracks back to the road. But when I reached the edge of the clearing, my footprints were gone. Not covered. Gone, as if I'd never arrived. Panic crept in slowly, like frostbite. told myself I must have circled the cabin instead of heading straight. So I walked again, deeper this time, counting my steps, marking trees with my knife. After 10 minutes, I stepped back into the clearing. The cabin stood exactly where it had before. My marks on the trees were gone too. That's when I noticed the sound, soft at first, almost rhythmic. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't coming from the door this time. It echoed from beneath the cabin, traveling through the frozen ground and up into my boots. I dropped to my knees, pressing my ear to the snow. Something was knocking upward. As if the ground itself wanted in, I barricaded myself inside after that. I dragged the table against the door, shoved the bed frame under the window, and kept the axe within arm's reach. The cabin felt smaller now, as if the walls had shifted while I was outside. The ceiling seemed lower, the corners darker. The knocking returned just after sunset. This time it wasn't rhythmic, it was curious. One knock, a pause, then another, in a different place. The door, the wall, the floor. It moved around the cabin slowly, testing it, learning it. I shouted, I begged. I told it to leave me alone. Each word only seemed to encourage it. Then the voice started. It sounded like my father. Not a perfect imitation, more like someone remembering him incorrectly. The cadence was wrong, the pauses too long, but it used his pet name for me, the one no one else knew. Elias, it called softly from beneath the floorboards. Let me in. I'm cold. I covered my ears. It kept knocking. Sometime near midnight, the floorboards began to bow. Not break, bend, as if something beneath them was pushing upward slowly, carefully, afraid of making noise. I backed against the wall, watching the wood rise and fall with a steady pressure, like breathing. The voice stopped. That silence was worse. Then came the answering knock. I hadn't touched the walls. I hadn't moved. But from my own side of the cabin, 3 slow taps echoed back, perfectly matching the rhythm I'd heard outside the night before. I realized then that it wasn't trying to get in anymore. It already had. The knocking spread through the cabin, every surface responding, walls, ceiling, floor, until I couldn't tell where it began or ended. The cabin itself had become the thing knocking. When the lights went out and the fire died all at once, the darkness felt crowded. And something stood up beneath the floor. Wearing my father's voice, I don't remember deciding to run. My body moved before my mind could argue. I grabbed my coat, dropped the axe, and threw myself at the door, shoving the barricade aside with a strength I didn't know I had. The door flew open. The cold hit me like a wall, stealing my breath, but relief followed instantly. Open space, air, distance. I sprinted into the trees, branches clawing at my face, my boots sinking deep into the snow. Behind me, the cabin was silent. Too silent. I didn't look back until my lungs burned. When I finally did, my legs nearly gave out. The cabin was still there, but it was closer than it should have been. Not behind me where I'd left it, but off to my left. Nestled between trees I was certain I hadn't passed. The knocking resumed. Not from the cabin this time, from the trees around me. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. The forest was answering itself. I realized then that the forest wasn't letting me go. No matter which direction I ran, the cabin reappeared, sometimes ahead, sometimes beside me, once directly in my path, like it had grown out of the snow. Each time, the knocking grew louder, closer, more insistent. My father's voice returned, no longer gentle. "You can't leave," it said from everywhere at once. "You already answered." I stumbled and fell, my hands plunging into the snow. Beneath the surface, it wasn't powder. It was wood, floorboards. I screamed as the snow collapsed inward, revealing the cabin's interior beneath the forest floor, as if the land itself was only a thin disguise. Hands pressed up from below the boards, too many, overlapping, knocking from the inside out. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was the cabin door opening beneath me. And this time, I was the one being let in. I woke up in the cabin, but it wasn't the same cabin. The walls were older, darker, warped beyond reason. The snow outside had vanished, replaced by shadowed trees pressing against frosted windows, their shapes impossible. My father's voice murmured somewhere in the walls, gentle and mocking at once. I tried the door, locked. No handle, no key, just wood. I banged on it until my hands bled. The knocking answered from every corner, slow, deliberate, as if the cabin itself was aware I was awake. I called out, screaming, begging, but no one came. The air was heavy with something cold, something patient. I realized I couldn't leave, not anymore. The forest, the snow, even the space around me, they were all illusions. The cabin was infinite. It wasn't on the land, it was the land. I sank to the floor, heart hammering, and listened as the knocking moved closer, echoing from the floor, walls, ceiling, everywhere at once. The voice whispered again, "You belong here now." I've lost track of time since that night. Days, weeks, months. The cabin doesn't follow earthly rules. I hear the knocking constantly now, beneath my skin, in the floor, in the walls, in my mind. Sometimes it imitates voices I love. Sometimes it calls names I've never heard. I've tried screaming. I've tried running. Every attempt fails. The cabin stretches, contracts, shifts. It feeds on fear, yes, but also on memory. It wants me to remember, and yet forget everything else. Sometimes I think I see my father in the corner, fading, laughing, disappearing when I blink. Sometimes I hear snow scraping against a window I know isn't there. I've written this to warn anyone who finds a cabin alone in the Finnish wilderness. Do not go. Do not answer the knocking. Do not step inside. Because once it hears you, it answers. And when it does, the cabin will never let you leave. And the knocking? It never stops. My name is Sophia Lane, and this happened the winter I went to Frost Hollow to photograph the northern lights. I'd always been drawn to remote places. Places where the cold isn't just weather, it's a presence. The tiny cabin I rented was miles from the nearest town, nestled in a valley surrounded by steep, snow-covered cliffs. The owner had warned me. The wind here, it speaks sometimes. Don't be surprised. I laughed. I thought it was just the poetic way Finns talk about winter. The first night was silent, except for the wind whipping around the cabin like a living thing. I set up my camera by the window, capturing the auroras shimmering green and violet above the forest. But then I heard it. Low at first, almost too faint to notice. A howl. Not an animal I knew, but something deeper, hollow, stretching across the valley. It wasn't long before I realized the sound was coming closer and closer toward my cabin. I tried to convince myself it was a wolf, or a pack of them, somewhere in the distance. But the sound was too precise, too intelligent. It circled the cabin, rising and falling, almost mimicking my movements as I paced inside. Every time I stepped to a window, it stopped. When I retreated, it resumed. By midnight, I was shaking. The cabin felt smaller, as if the walls themselves were leaning in. The howl had taken on a rhythm, a cadence that seemed almost like communication. I whispered to it, laughing nervously, asking it to leave. No answer. Just the wind and the howl howling back. Then the windows rattled. Not the whole cabin, just the glass, as if something outside was testing the strength of the walls. And in the reflection of the frost, I thought I saw eyes. Too many eyes, staring from the tree line, glowing faintly with a yellow tint that vanished when I blinked. I realized then that I wasn't alone. I couldn't stay inside forever, but stepping outside felt like stepping into a trap. I grabbed my coat and boots, camera in hand, and forced myself into the cold. Snow crunched beneath my feet, and the howl followed, circling me, shifting in tone as if studying my fear. I thought I saw movement, a shadow slipping between the trees, but when I raised the flashlight, nothing was there. The valley seemed alive, breathing. Each time I tried to retrace my steps toward the cabin, the snow shifted unnaturally, hiding the trail I'd made. It was as if the valley itself had rearranged while I wasn't looking. Then I noticed prints, not human, not wolf. They were tall, narrow, with elongated toes that sank deep into the snow. They led directly to the cabin, and then stopped abruptly at the front door. I felt the air press in as the howl changed. It wasn't outside anymore. It was inside, whispering my name in a voice too close to reality. I couldn't ignore it. The door rattled as if something enormous pressed against it, trying to enter. I held the camera like a shield, stepping back toward the wall. My heart pounded, and each exhale left frost in the air. The howl grew louder, sharper, echoing off the cliffs. It was no longer distant. It was all around me, bouncing, pressing, suffocating. I shouted, begging it to leave, but the sound of my own voice seemed to only encourage it. Then I noticed the scratches on the door. They hadn't been there earlier. Long, deep gouges, like claws that could tear through both wood and reality. Suddenly, the howl stopped. A silence so complete it was deafening fell over the valley. I froze, thinking it was over. Then a single knock, soft, deliberate, on the door. Not a paw, not a branch, something intelligent, something patient. I pressed my back to the wall, knowing if I opened that door, I might never return. I spent the next hour in silence, too terrified to move. The snow outside pressed against the windows like it was alive, and the shadows of the trees seemed to lean closer, stretching unnaturally. Every so often, a howl would break the quiet, a long, bone-chilling wail that wrapped around the cabin and sank into my chest. I tried to call for help, but my phone had no signal. Not a bar, not even a flicker. I realized I was completely cut off. My breathing was loud in the small cabin, each exhale visible in the frigid air. Then came the whispers. Soft, almost polite at first, floating in from the shadows. "Sophia, come outside. Come play." I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was hallucination. But the doorknob turned, slowly, almost experimentally. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But stepping into that night, into that howl, felt like stepping into a trap I couldn't escape. I grabbed my coat and forced myself to the door. Every nerve in my body screamed to stop, but curiosity and terror pushed me forward. When I opened it, the snow wasn't empty. Footprints surrounded the cabin in a perfect circle, leading away into the forest, but never leaving a trail. And the howling, it wasn't coming from the trees. It was coming from the footprints themselves. The snow shifted as if it were breathing. could see the prints deepen, elongate, twist as if whatever made them was alive and aware of me. A figure stepped from the shadows at the edge of the clearing. Tall, thin, too long-limbed. Its head tilted unnaturally, studying me. The yellow eyes I had glimpsed through the window glowed brighter, reflecting the aurora above. I wanted to run, but before I could, the howl became a chorus, surrounding me, moving in rhythm with the figure's steps, pressing me closer to the edge of the snow-covered cliff. Image prompt 6. I stumbled backward, slipping in the deep snow, and the figure advanced without sound. Every instinct screamed to flee, but the clearing felt smaller, tighter, like the trees themselves were leaning in to trap me. The aurora above flickered, as if warning me. The figure stopped a few meters away, head tilted, observing, almost curious. Then came the whispers again. Not words this time, but a mimicry of voices I knew. My mother, my childhood friend, calling me from the shadows. I covered my ears and screamed, but the voices only got louder. The snow beneath me moved again, folding in on itself like waves. My boots sank into hollowed ground, and the temperature dropped further. My camera slipped from my hands, breaking into the snow with a sharp crack. I realized in that moment that Frost Hollow wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it wanted me to stay. Panic overtook me. I tried to scramble to my feet, but the snow gripped me like hands. The figure moved silently closer, its eyes glowing unnaturally bright in the darkness. The howling returned, not outside, but from beneath the snow, a low vibration running through the ground. I kicked desperately, breaking free just enough to stagger backward toward the cabin. I yanked the door open and slammed it behind me, breathing hard, trying to convince myself I was safe. But the scratching began immediately, on the roof, the walls, the floor. Soft at first, then louder, echoing like multiple claws raking through the cabin. I realized I wasn't inside a cabin anymore. I was inside a prison. The clearing, the snow, the forest. They weren't natural. The hollow had stretched itself around me, bending space, folding reality. I sank to the floor, heart hammering, listening to the howls and scratching outside. It wasn't done with me yet. Not by far. I lost track of time after that night. Hours, days. I couldn't tell. The cabin had become a prism of shadows, stretching impossibly, twisting in ways that defied logic. The howling wasn't outside anymore. It came from every direction at once. The walls seemed to breathe, moving subtly, almost watching. I tried to leave, but the door refused. No handle, no latch, just wood. The snow outside no longer made sense. Footprints that hadn't existed before now surrounded the cabin, circling me, moving as if alive. Then the figure returned, stepping through the shadows without opening the door. Its yellow eyes glowed brighter than ever, reflecting the faint aurora light that filtered through warped windows. The howls coalesced into a single voice, chanting my name, drawing me to the center of the cabin. I realized with absolute terror that Frost Hollow hadn't just trapped me. It had been shaping me, bending me, preparing me to become one of its echoes. I've been here ever since. Days? Weeks? Months? I no longer know. Time stretches and twists inside this hollowed cabin. The howls never stop. They echo in the walls, under the floor, inside my skull. I hear voices I recognize, speaking words I never said. The figure visits me constantly. Sometimes it stands silently in the corner, watching. Sometimes it moves beneath the floorboards, knocking, whispering, breathing. I have tried everything, screaming, running, hiding, but none of it matters. The cabin has claimed me. I am now part of Frost Hollow, If you ever find a cabin alone in a northern valley, surrounded by cliffs and snow, heed my warning. The hollow isn't just haunted. It's alive. It listens. It learns. And if it chooses you, it will not let go. Every night, I hear the howls, calling others, shaping them to join me. And I cannot leave. I am trapped. And the hollow is patient. My name is Marcus Niemi, and this happened the winter I agreed to house-sit a cabin in the far north of Lapland. The owner promised solitude, untouched snow, and the perfect setting for a writing retreat. I didn't care about warnings. I was eager to escape city life, deadlines, and people. The cabin was small but sturdy, tucked between snow-laden firs. A frozen creek ran nearby, whispering beneath ice. The first night was quiet, too quiet. The wind outside howled, but inside, only the faint crackle of my fireplace kept me company. Around midnight, I heard it. A soft knock at the door. I froze, certain it was impossible. The nearest house was miles away, and the snowstorm had made the roads impassable. 3 slow knocks followed, deliberate, echoing off the walls. I approached cautiously. The porch was empty, nothing but thick snow. My heart pounded, and a shiver ran through me. Whoever or whatever was outside hadn't left. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to the wind or a branch tapping the door. But the knocks returned, softer this time, almost hesitant, like someone testing if I was home. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. The snow was pristine, no footprints, no signs of anyone approaching. Then I heard it from behind me, a whisper, low, chilling, almost human. "Marcus." I spun around, but the cabin was empty. The forest beyond stretched silent, white and still, yet the whisper repeated, closer, louder, as if the trees themselves were speaking my name. I ran back inside, bolting the door. The knocks didn't stop. They came from the windows now, soft, deliberate, circling the cabin. My mind raced. Could it be someone trapped in the storm? A prank? Or something else? Something that shouldn't exist? The fire flickered, casting shadows that twisted unnaturally, and I realized I was no longer alone. I stayed up the rest of the night, sitting by the fire, every sense on high alert. The knocking had stopped, replaced by a low, rhythmic creaking from the porch. I tried to convince myself it was just the old wood settling, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The sound was deliberate, like someone, or something, was pacing outside. Around 3 a.m., I finally worked up the courage to peer through the window. My flashlight barely illuminated the snow, but I could see faint shapes moving just beyond the clearing. Too tall, too still, standing in impossible positions. My stomach churned. Then a sound I hadn't expected. Soft, deliberate footsteps on the roof. Not snow shifting, but heavy, careful steps pacing the cabin, circling, waiting. I backed away from the window, heart hammering, realizing that whatever was out there wasn't content to stay outside. It wanted in, and it had all night to figure out how. The next morning, I thought I could escape the terror with daylight. I opened the door, only to find footprints leading to the cabin, and none leading away. Not human, not animal. They were long, narrow, with claw-like toes, pressed deep into the snow as if whatever walked them had immense weight. I grabbed my gear and tried to follow the nearest trail, hoping it would lead to a road. But the forest seemed to shift as I moved. Paths disappeared, trees rearranged, snow mounted in unnatural ways. The whispers returned, low and almost playful, echoing through the pines. "Marcus, come back, come play." I ran back to the cabin, my mind panicking. The door now had scratches along the edges, long, deliberate, as if the thing outside was testing it. When I turned to look out the window, I froze. The clearing was empty, but I saw a figure reflected behind me. Not in the glass, behind me. Tall, thin, faceless, just standing there in the shadows. I barricaded the door and windows that night, but it didn't matter. The sound of footsteps returned, heavier, louder, echoing through the cabin, as if the walls themselves were alive. I clutched my camera, my only weapon, and tried to record anything that proved this wasn't my imagination. The screen of the camera flickered. The battery drained in seconds, even though it was fully charged. Then came the whispering, right beside my ear. "Marcus." I spun around. No one was there. Then the fire flared unnaturally, casting shadows that moved independently of the flames. A figure appeared briefly in the corner, tall, thin, faceless, and vanished as quickly as it came. I realized that the cabin itself was a trap. The forest outside had been a lure. The snow, the frozen creek, the isolation, they were all bait. And now, whatever had been following me, learning me, shaping me, was inside. Hours passed, though I couldn't tell how many. Every creak, every whisper, every draft of wind felt like movement. Closer, closer. The howling from outside returned faintly, echoing in rhythm with the footsteps inside. I backed into a corner, terrified to breathe too loudly. The temperature dropped sharply. My breath froze instantly. I tried to reason, telling myself it was hallucination, exhaustion, or the isolation. But the scratches on the walls, the shifting shadows, and the low, deliberate knocks disproved every rational thought. Then I noticed it. The reflection in the camera screen. Not my own. The tall, thin figure, standing directly behind me, its head tilted unnaturally, eyes glowing faint yellow. The whispering grew louder, closer, repeating over and over. "Come outside! Come outside!" I realized with crushing certainty that leaving wasn't an option. It wanted me to step outside into the snow, into the forest, into the waiting, frozen trap it had prepared. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every creak, every shifting shadow made my skin crawl. The whispers had grown insistent, almost impatient. "Marcus, come outside." They circled me from every corner, bouncing off the walls, filling the small cabin with impossible echoes. I grabbed my coat and boots, determined to face whatever it was outside, reasoning that I couldn't stay trapped forever. But as soon as I opened the door, the snow outside looked wrong. The clearing I remembered was gone, replaced by a tunnel of snow-laden trees, distorted, unnaturally straight, pressing inward. And then I saw it. Footprints forming in real time, moving toward me in the snow. Long, thin, clawed toes pressing deep, as if walking on invisible ice. The howling rose in response, surrounding me, echoing from the forest and beneath my own feet. I realized then that whatever had followed me here was playing a game. And I was the prey. Panic set in. I ran back toward the cabin, but the door had shifted. It wasn't where I remembered. The walls seemed to stretch and curve, twisting space like a funhouse mirror. I pounded on it, screaming, but the sound only bounced back at me, distorted, mocking. The figure appeared inside, silent, faceless. Its yellow eyes glowed brighter than ever, reflecting the aurora light through the warped windows. I tried to run past it, but the cabin had become a maze. Every step forward led me back to the same corner, the same shadowed wall, the same whispering, "Come outside, come outside." Then the scratching started again, circling the room from walls, ceiling, and floor. It was deliberate, patient, not mindless. I realized with icy certainty that leaving the cabin wasn't enough. The forest outside, the snow, the clearing, they were part of it too. The trap wasn't the cabin. The trap was me. Time no longer existed. Hours? Days? I couldn't tell. The cabin? The snow? The forest? They had all merged into a living trap. The whispers and the howls were constant, echoing in my skull, moving the walls, bending the floor beneath me. Every corner held a shadow, every reflection a faceless figure. I realized the forest wasn't outside, it was part of the cabin. The clearing, the snow, the frozen creek, they had only existed to lure me here. The footprints now surrounded me inside, moving in impossible patterns, crawling toward me with intent. I grabbed my coat, my last shred of courage, and tried to force the door open. But the cabin shifted, stretching impossibly. The figure materialized behind me, towering, faceless, silent, its yellow eyes locked onto mine. The whispering became my name, repeated endlessly, mingled with laughter I had never heard before. I understood then that Frost Hollow didn't just want me trapped. It wanted me to join it, become another echo within the snow, the forest, the walls. I am still here. Days? Weeks? Months? I have lost count. The cabin has consumed all sense of time. The whispers never stop. They echo through the walls, beneath the floor, inside my mind. I see figures in every shadow, hear the howls of the forest circling me endlessly. The faceless figure visits constantly, moving silently, watching. Sometimes it mimics voices I know, calling me outside. Sometimes it disappears, leaving the scratches, the shifting snow, the warped walls. I understand now. I cannot leave. I am part of Frost Hollow. If you ever stumble upon a cabin in the northern wilderness, surrounded by frozen creeks and snow-covered trees, heed my warning. The Hollow is alive. It listens. It waits. And if it chooses you, it will not release you. Every night, I hear the whispers calling others, and I cannot warn them. I am trapped, and the Hollow is patient. My name is Elina Korhonen, and this happened the winter I decided to spend a week in total isolation at a remote cabin in northern Finland. I wanted peace, silence, and the snow as my only companion. The cabin was tucked between thick pine forests, the kind of place where the wind whistles through branches and the snow muffles everything else. The first night was calm. I lit the fireplace, made tea, and listened to the snow falling outside. But around midnight, I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not the wind, not a branch snapping. A soft, deliberate tapping at the window. 3 quick raps, then a pause, then another 3. I froze. The nearest road was miles away, and no one could have walked through the snow unnoticed. I whispered to myself that it was probably an animal. But deep down, I knew something was out there. My name is Elina Korhonen, and this happened the winter I decided to spend a week in total isolation at a remote cabin in northern Finland. I wanted peace, silence, and the snow as my only companion. The cabin was tucked between thick pine forests, the kind of place where the wind whistles through branches and the snow muffles everything else. The first night was calm. I lit the fireplace, made tea, and listened to the snow falling outside. But around midnight, I heard it. A sound that didn't belong, not the wind, not a branch snapping. A soft, deliberate tapping at the window, 3 quick raps, then a pause, then another 3. I froze. The nearest road was miles away, and no one could have walked through the snow unnoticed. I whispered to myself that it was probably an animal. But deep down, I knew something was out there. The next hours were torturous. Every sound, The crackling fire, the wind brushing the trees, even the faint creak of the cabin's walls felt amplified. I kept glancing toward the window, half expecting that pale figure to return. The shadows inside the cabin seemed to stretch unnaturally, bending toward me, pressing like they were alive. Then I heard it again, a slow, deliberate knock from the back door. My pulse raced. I hadn't noticed a path leading there. I approached cautiously, trying to convince myself it was a branch or the old wood contracting in the cold. But as I reached for the handle, a whisper floated from the shadows. "Elena." I froze. The air felt heavier, colder, and I could see my breath hanging in thick clouds. My instincts screamed to run. But the cabin had already changed. The hallway I knew now seemed longer, darker, twisting into corners I hadn't seen before. I realized I wasn't just being watched. I was being lured. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering. The whispers didn't stop. They multiplied, echoing from corners, the ceiling, even beneath the floor. "Elena, come out. Come play." The voice was patient, calm, yet undeniably sinister. I stumbled into the main room and noticed movement in the reflection of the fireplace glass. A figure taller than any human, pale and faceless, stood just behind me. My blood ran cold. I spun around. Nothing, just the empty cabin. The knocking resumed, this time on every window. I ran to each one, terrified to see outside, but the snow-covered forest was empty. Yet I felt it, watching, waiting. The shadows flickered again, unnaturally, stretching toward me with intent. Then came a sound I will never forget. The soft scraping of claws across the wooden floor, moving closer. I realized the cabin wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and I was now a part of it. I spent the next few hours frozen in the main room, every nerve screaming. The scraping continued intermittently, circling me, shifting direction as if aware of my movements. I dared not look directly at the corners of the room, afraid the faceless figure might emerge. My camera, my only tool to document anything, had already died, leaving me alone with my fear. Then the temperature dropped sharply. My breath hung in thick clouds, frosting over the wooden floor. The whispers returned, growing impatient. "Elena, come outside." I could hear faint steps in the snow just beyond the cabin, though no footprints appeared. I backed toward the fireplace, trying to think rationally. But rationality had no place here. The cabin seemed alive, stretching, bending, waiting. Shadows leaned closer, curling around me like living smoke. I understood that the creature, whatever it was, didn't just haunt the cabin. It owned it, and I had no way of leaving without its consent. Hours blurred into one another. I dared not sleep. Every sound, the creak of the roof, the tapping of snow against the walls, the shifting shadows, was amplified in my mind. The whispers were now constant, circling me from all directions, echoing, repeating, testing me. I tried to barricade the windows and doors, but they seemed to move subtly, stretching, bending, twisting as if the cabin itself rejected my defenses. The figure returned, materializing silently in corners I hadn't noticed before. Its faceless head tilted, observing me. Its presence pressed on my chest. I realized then the creature didn't need to strike. The cabin itself was the weapon. Each shadow, each whisper, each scraping sound was part of it. I was trapped in a living nightmare, one designed to break me, to make me part of the walls, part of the snow, part of the silent, frozen cabin. I sank to the floor, shivering, knowing the night was far from over, and that it was only just beginning. By the 7th hour of this unending nightmare, I felt my mind fraying. The shadows moved independently now, no longer tied to the fire or moonlight. Every corner of the cabin seemed alive, curling toward me, pressing in. The whispers grew impatient, almost coaxing, repeating my name with a softness that was more terrifying than a scream. I tried to stand, to flee, to reach the door, but the floor beneath me seemed to pulse, shifting slightly, keeping me off balance. The faceless figure emerged from one corner, taller, limbs stretching unnaturally, almost gliding. Its glowing yellow eyes were fixed on me, and a cold, suffocating weight pressed down, forcing me to my knees. I understood then that leaving was impossible. The cabin, the forest, the snow, they had fused into a single entity. I was inside its body, trapped, observed, measured. And it was patient, waiting for me to break completely. I crawled to the fireplace, desperate for warmth, though the cold was impossible to escape. The whispers followed, now mocking. "Elena, come out. Play with us." Every syllable vibrated through my chest, pressing, squeezing, making it hard to breathe. The faceless figure circled silently, gliding along the walls, its presence warping the very air around me. Then I noticed the snow outside the windows moving unnaturally, forming paths, circling the cabin. It wasn't just the interior. The entire forest was alive, bending to the creature's will. The footprints in the snow began to multiply, forming patterns, waiting. I backed away from the windows, heart hammering, and realized the cabin had become a maze. Every step forward brought me back to the same corner, the same shadowed wall, the same whispers. Escape was an illusion. The silent cabin wasn't just haunted. It was a predator, patient, calculating, and relentless. I sank to the floor, trembling, knowing the worst was yet to come. Hours, or was it days, passed, though I no longer had any way to measure time. The cabin's walls had completely lost their familiar shape. Shadows stretched across the ceiling, curling like fingers toward me. The faceless figure was always near, sometimes just at the edge of my vision, sometimes reflected faintly in the frost-covered windows. The whispers had grown insistent, almost commanding. "Elena, come outside. Forever." I tried to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. The snow outside began to shift, forming impossible structures, tunnels and walls that shouldn't exist. Every instinct told me to run, but the cabin wouldn't let me leave. It moved subtly, bending space, rearranging itself, keeping me inside its cold, silent grip. I realized then the truth. I wasn't just trapped, I was being rewritten. The silent cabin wasn't just alive, it was reshaping me, molding me into one of its shadows, one of its whispers, one of its victims. There was no escape. I am still here. I do not know how long I have been here. The silent cabin has consumed every sense of time, every boundary between inside and outside. The whispers never stop. They circle me endlessly, echoing from the walls, beneath the floor, and inside my mind. The faceless figure visits constantly, sometimes appearing near me, sometimes in the warped reflections of frost on the windows. I understand now. I am part of it. The cabin, the forest, the snow, they have fused into a single living entity. The silent cabin does not just trap. You become part of its body, part of its whispers, part of its shadows. If anyone ever finds an isolated cabin deep in a snow-covered forest, heed my warning. It is alive. It listens. It waits. And if it chooses you, it will not let go. Every night, I hear the whispers calling others. I am trapped, and the silent cabin is patient. My name is Jasper Lund, and this happened the winter I rented a remote cabin deep in the Black Pines, far north in Sweden. I was seeking solitude for my photography project, unaware of the warnings about the forest from locals. The cabin sat isolated, surrounded by tall, dark pine trees, and the snow lay thick and untouched for miles. The first night was calm. I lit the fireplace, unpacked my gear, and marveled at the quiet beauty outside. But as darkness fell, a subtle sound reached me, a low, deliberate tapping at the door. 3 slow raps, then a pause, then 3 more. I froze. No road led here. No one could have walked through the snow. Yet the tapping persisted, almost teasing, deliberate. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I told myself it was the wind or an animal, but deep down, I knew this wasn't natural. Something was outside, watching, waiting. I tried to ignore the sound, sipping tea and focusing on my camera. But the tapping continued, slow, deliberate, almost like it was testing me. I approached the door cautiously, heart racing. Snow outside was pristine, no footprints, nothing to explain the noise. Then came the whisper. Low, almost melodic, carrying a weight that pressed on my chest. Jasper. I swung my flashlight toward the trees. At the edge of the clearing, I glimpsed a pale, humanoid figure standing unnaturally still. When I blinked, it was gone. The air grew icy cold, frost forming on my beard, and I realized the forest was no longer silent. Something had found me. The shadows inside the cabin flickered strangely, elongating, bending toward me, as if alive. My rational mind searched for explanations, but none existed. I was alone, yet not alone. And deep down, I knew that the forest, the cabin, and the snow had all become part of something watching, waiting, and patient. The night stretched endlessly. Every creak of the cabin, every soft whistle of wind through the pines felt like a warning. I tried to focus on my camera, hoping to capture some proof of what I had glimpsed outside, but the battery drained within minutes. The tapping returned, this time from the back wall of the cabin. Slow, deliberate, taunting. I approached cautiously. The shadowy corner of the room seemed darker than usual, stretching toward me, curling like it had substance. Then came the whisper, soft but insistent. Jasper, come outside. I froze. The snow outside reflected moonlight, but the clearing I remembered was gone. The trees pressed closer, forming impossible shapes, walls of black that didn't exist before. I realized the forest itself was alive, bending reality to trap me. I backed away from the back wall, heart hammering. The cabin wasn't just a building, it was a trap. And something was learning me, calculating the moment I would break. I retreated to the fireplace, trying to calm myself. But the whispers continued, now from all directions, echoing through the walls, floor, and ceiling. Jasper, come outside, play. I looked through the frosted window again. The snow seemed to ripple, forming unnatural tunnels and walls, twisting toward the cabin as if the forest itself had teeth. Then I saw movement in the reflection of the glass. A tall, thin figure with no face, gliding silently, its limbs bending in impossible angles. Its yellow eyes, no, not eyes, glowing holes, fixed on me. I backed away, almost tripping over my own feet. The cabin's interior had subtly changed. Hallways stretched farther than they should, corners appeared where none existed, the ceiling bent slightly downward. I realized the cabin itself was alive, reshaping itself to keep me inside. I sank to the floor, trembling. I was trapped, not by walls or snow, but by something patient, calculating, and relentless. Escape was no longer an option. Hours passed, though I couldn't tell if it was still night or early morning. The whispers never stopped. They circled me, echoing from walls, floor, and ceiling. Each syllable pressed on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The faceless figure lingered in every corner, moving silently, bending the shadows to its will. I tried to barricade the windows and doors, stacking chairs and heavy furniture, but they subtly shifted, bending space, rejecting my attempts. The snow outside had begun to move unnaturally, forming paths, tunnels, and circles that weren't there before. The forest itself was alive, folding in on the cabin, closing in. I understood then the terrifying truth. This wasn't just a haunted cabin. It was a living trap, patient and calculating. It wanted me contained, studied, broken, and every creak, every whisper, every shadow was a part of its strategy. Escape was impossible unless it allowed it. Panic consumed me. I crouched by the fireplace, shivering, every nerve on edge. The whispers were insistent, almost mocking. "Jasper, come outside, play with us." The faceless figure moved silently, circling me, its yellow glowing voids piercing the dim light of the cabin. Then came the scratching, not random, but deliberate. Claws dragging across wood, walls, and floor, moving in patterns, almost forming letters I couldn't read. I backed into the corner, heart pounding, realizing the cabin itself was participating, the structure alive, reshaping itself with every breath I took. I grabbed my camera one last time, hoping for proof, but it flickered and died instantly. The shadows grew heavier, denser, pressing inward like physical hands. I understood now that this wasn't just terror. It was a test, a slow crushing, designed to bend me to the will of the cabin and the forest that fed it. I sank to the floor, trembling, knowing the night was far from over. By the 7th hour, I felt my sanity slipping. The shadows no longer obeyed light. They stretched independently, curling along the walls, floor, and ceiling as if alive. Every whisper now carried intention, almost taunting me. "Jasper, come outside." I forced myself to stand, but the cabin resisted. The floor seemed to pulse beneath my feet, subtle shifts throwing me off balance. The faceless figure emerged from a corner I hadn't noticed before, taller, limbs bending in impossible angles, gliding silently, unhurried. Its glowing voids fixed on me, burning through my mind. I realized then that escape wasn't the goal. The cabin and the forest outside were teaching me something, testing me, reshaping me, breaking me piece by piece. Every creak, every cold draft, every ripple in the snow was part of its design. I was not a guest. I was prey, being measured, studied, and slowly rewritten into the darkness that surrounded me. I tried to retreat to the fireplace, clinging to warmth and sanity, but the shadows followed, curling, leaning, twisting toward me with a palpable hunger. The whispers grew impatient, repeating my name endlessly. "Jasper, come outside." Forever. Peering through the frosted windows, I noticed the snow outside forming unnatural shapes. Tunnels, spirals, walls pressing closer to the cabin, as if the forest itself had teeth. And then the reflection in the glass caught my eye. A tall, thin, faceless figure, gliding silently along the snow, limbs bending impossibly, glowing voids fixed on me. The interior had changed subtly too. Hallways stretched farther than they should, corners appeared where none existed, and the ceiling slanted downward. The cabin was alive, reshaping itself to ensure I could not leave. I sank to the floor, trembling and realizing the truth. The cabin was not just a place to stay. It was a living predator, patient, calculating, and relentless. My fight had only just begun. Time had lost all meaning. The The cabin's walls twisted, the shadows thickened, and every whisper was now a command. "Jasper, come outside. Join us." I could feel the forest pressing in through the windows, the snow moving unnaturally as if alive, forming impossible tunnels and spirals. The faceless figure was always just at the edge of my vision, gliding silently, limbs bending in ways no human body should, glowing voids fixed on me. Every step I took inside the cabin seemed to bring me back to the same corner, the same warped hallway, the same whispering walls. Escape was a cruel illusion. I realized I was no longer a visitor. The cabin, the forest, the snow, they had fused into a single living entity. It wasn't just hunting me, it was rewriting me, folding me into its shadows, molding me into part of its endless, silent hunger. I understood that my fear and my desperation were exactly what it wanted. I was trapped, completely and utterly. I am still here. Days, weeks, months, I do not know. The cabin and forest have consumed all sense of time. The whispers never stop. They circle me endlessly, echoing through walls, floor, and ceiling. The faceless figure visits constantly, sometimes near, sometimes in warped reflections, glowing voids fixed on me. I understand now that I am part of it. The Black Pines cabin is alive, a predator that absorbs its victims into its body. The snow, the forest, and the walls are not just scenery. They are extensions of it. I am no longer a person, just another echo, another shadow, another whisper in its endless hunger. If anyone ever stumbles upon a cabin deep in the Black Pines, heed my warning. It is alive. It listens. It waits. And if it chooses you, it will not let go. Every night, I hear whispers calling others. I am trapped, and the cabin is patient, endless, and merciless. My name is Mikael Strand, and this happened the winter I took a short retreat to a remote cabin in northern Norway. I wanted isolation, a place to write, with nothing but snow, trees, and silence. The cabin was hidden deep in the forest, far from roads, far from anyone who could hear a scream. The first night was calm. I lit the fireplace, arranged my notes, and admired the thick snow blanketing the pine trees outside. But then I heard it, a slow, deliberate knock at the door. Not loud, but precise. 3 raps, then a pause, then 3 more. My heart froze. No path led to the cabin. No one could have walked through the unbroken snow. Yet the knocking persisted, deliberate enough to make me certain it wasn't natural. Something was out there, waiting, patient, and watching me. Tried to ignore the sound, sipping tea and focusing on my writing. But the knocks continued. Steady, deliberate, almost mocking. I approached the door cautiously, my breath forming icy clouds in the cold air inside. Outside, the snow remained pristine, untouched, with no footprints or signs of passage. Then came a whisper, soft but unmistakable. "Mikael." It wasn't human. It carried a weight, a presence pressing against my chest and freezing my thoughts. I swung the flashlight toward the trees. At the edge of the clearing, I glimpsed a pale, humanoid figure standing unnaturally still, almost blending with the snow. When I blinked, it vanished. The cold seemed to intensify, pressing in through the walls, and I realized that I was not alone. Shadows inside the cabin flickered unnaturally, stretching as if they were alive. Rational explanations failed. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. And yet something patient and intelligent was observing me, calculating my fear. The night stretched endlessly. Every creak of the cabin, every whisper of wind through the pines felt magnified. I tried to focus on my notes, but the knocking returned, this time from the far corner of the cabin, slow and deliberate. I approached cautiously, my hands trembling. The shadows in that corner seemed unnaturally dark, curling toward me, almost solid. Then I heard it again, the whisper, closer this time. "Mikhail." My breath caught in my throat. I shone the flashlight toward the corner, but there was nothing there. Just the shifting shadows, moving independently of the light, curling along the walls, floor, and ceiling. I realized then that the cabin itself had changed subtly. Hallways stretched farther than they should, corners appeared where none existed, and the floor seemed to pulse beneath my feet. The forest outside felt alive too, closing in. I understood the terrible truth. I was trapped, and something was studying me. I backed away from the corner, heart racing, and sank to the floor near the fireplace. The whispers grew louder, surrounding me from every angle. "Mikhail, come outside. Play." The cold pressed in, frosting the walls and window panes, thickening the shadows that now seemed to reach toward me like fingers. Peering through the frosted windows, I saw movement in the snow. Tunnels and spirals had formed, snaking unnaturally around the cabin, as if the forest itself had teeth. A tall, pale figure glided silently through the trees. Its limbs bent impossibly, gliding above the snow, glowing voids where its eyes should have been fixed on me. Inside, the cabin had subtly changed again. Hallways stretched, corners appeared where none existed, the ceiling tilted downward. I realized the cabin was alive, reshaping itself to keep me trapped. Every creak, every whisper, every shadow was part of a design I could not understand. I sank lower, shivering, knowing that the night and whatever hunted me was far from over, hours blurred together. The cabin seemed alive and breathing with me, watching me. Every creak, every draft, every flicker of firelight felt intentional, as though the walls themselves were aware. The whispers were relentless, pressing in from every corner. "Mikhail, come outside." I tried to barricade the doors and windows, piling chairs and tables, but the cabin subtly resisted. The furniture shifted, the floor creaked unnaturally, and the walls warped slightly. The snow outside moved too, forming patterns, spirals, and tunnels I could not comprehend. The forest itself seemed to lean closer, black pines swaying unnaturally despite the still air. I realized the truth. This wasn't just a haunted cabin. It was alive, patient, calculating, and it wanted to break me. Every shadow, every whisper, every shift in the floor was part of its plan. I was no longer just a visitor. I was prey, trapped in a predator that existed both inside the cabin and beyond in the frozen forest. Fear consumed me. I crouched by the fireplace, shivering, as the whispers grew impatient and mocking. "Mikhail, come outside, forever." The faceless figure moved silently, circling, limbs bending impossibly, glowing voids fixed on me. Then came the scratching. Not random, deliberate. Claws scraping across the walls, floor, and ceiling, moving in patterns almost forming letters I could not read. I realized the cabin itself participated, alive, reshaping itself to ensure I could not leave. I grabbed my camera, hoping to capture proof, but it flickered and died instantly. The shadows thickened, pressing inward like hands made of darkness. I understood then. The cabin wasn't simply haunting me. It was studying me, molding me into part of itself. I sank to the floor, trembling, heart hammering. The night stretched endlessly, and I knew it would continue until I broke completely, or became something else, absorbed into the cabin and the frozen forest beyond. By the 7th hour, I could feel my mind fraying. The shadows moved independently now, ignoring the flickering firelight, curling and stretching like living things. Every whisper became a command, insistent and pressing. "Mikhail, come outside." I tried to stand, but the floor beneath me felt alive, pulsing slightly, throwing me off balance. The faceless figure emerged from a corner I hadn't noticed before, taller than before, limbs bending impossibly, gliding silently, glowing voids piercing the dim light. I realized then that the cabin itself was a predator. It wasn't just haunting me, it was studying me, learning my fear, reshaping the walls, the shadows, even the snow outside to trap me further. Every creak, every cold draft, every subtle shift was intentional. I was no longer a guest. I was prey. A puzzle piece the cabin intended to absorb into its frozen, whispering body. I retreated to the fireplace, seeking warmth, seeking sanity. But the shadows followed, pressing, curling, stretching, almost tangible. The whispers surrounded me, mocking and insistent. "Mikhail, come outside. Forever." Peering through the frosted windows, I saw the snow moving unnaturally, forming tunnels, spirals, and walls that hadn't existed minutes before. The pale figure glided silently through the black pines, limbs bending impossibly, glowing voids fixed on me with terrifying intent. Inside, the cabin had subtly changed again. Hallways stretched longer, corners appeared where none existed, the ceiling tilted downward. I realized the cabin wasn't a building. It was a living, calculating trap. Every detail, the creaking floors, the shifting shadows, the frozen wind outside, was designed to break me, to absorb me into its icy, whispering body. I sank to the floor, trembling, knowing the night was far from over. Escape was no longer an option, and survival depended on understanding the cabin's terrible intelligence and avoiding its relentless attention. Time had no meaning. The cabin pulsed with life, shadows crawling and twisting along every surface. The whispers grew louder, insistent, commanding. "Mikhail, come outside. Join us." The snow outside shifted, forming impossible spirals, tunnels, and walls, pressing closer to the cabin with every heartbeat. The faceless figure was always at the edge of my vision, gliding silently, limbs bending in ways no human body should. Its glowing voids pierced my mind, stripping away the thin veil of sanity I still clung to. Every step I took inside the cabin brought me back to the same warped hallway, the same corner, the same echoing whispers. Escape had become an illusion, a cruel joke. I realized I was no longer a visitor. The cabin, the forest, the snow, they had fused into one living entity. It wasn't hunting me, it was absorbing me, folding me into its shadows, reshaping me into part of its endless, icy hunger. I am still here. Days, weeks, months? I cannot tell. The cabin and forest have consumed all sense of time. The whispers never stop. They circle me endlessly, echoing from walls, floor, and ceiling. The faceless figure appears constantly, sometimes near, sometimes in warped reflections, glowing voids fixed on me. I understand now. I am part of it. The frostbitten guest cabin is alive, a predator that absorbs its victims into its icy body. The snow, the forest, and the walls are extensions of it. I am no longer Mikhail Strand. I am another whisper, another shadow, another echo in its frozen hunger. If anyone ever finds a cabin deep in a northern forest, heed my warning. It is alive. It listens. It waits. And if it chooses you, it will not let go. Every night, I hear whispers calling new victims. I am trapped. And the cabin is patient, eternal, and merciless. My name is Elin Varga, and this happened the winter I traveled alone to a tiny, isolated cabin in the Finnish Lapland. I was chasing solitude and inspiration for my travel photography. Far from the nearest town, far from roads, far from help. The cabin was tucked deep among frost-covered pines, surrounded by endless white snow stretching into the horizon. The first evening was peaceful. I lit the fireplace, brewed tea, and watched snowflakes drift lazily outside. But then I heard it, a soft scraping at the door, deliberate and rhythmic. I froze. 3 slow scrapes, then a pause, then 3 more. No path led here, no human footprints. Yet the sound continued, steady, intentional. Something was out there, moving through the snow, with an intelligence I couldn't comprehend. My heart pounded as a chilling thought struck me. I was not alone. And whatever was out there wasn't just observing. It was waiting. I tried to ignore the noise, focusing on my camera and notes. But the scraping continued. Each sound seemed deliberate, mocking my solitude. I approached the door, flashlight in hand, and shined it across the thick snow. No footprints, nothing. The snow outside remained pristine, untouched. Then I heard a whisper, soft, almost melodic. "Elin." My breath caught. The voice carried a weight that pressed against my chest, cold and unnatural. I swung the flashlight toward the trees. At the edge of the clearing, I glimpsed a pale figure, unnaturally thin, standing completely still among the black pines. When I blinked, it vanished. The shadows inside the cabin flickered unnaturally, stretching toward me as if alive. I realized I was being watched by something intelligent, something patient, and utterly alien to the natural world. My heart hammered. The snow, the trees, the silence. It was all a trap, and I had stumbled right into it. The night stretched endlessly. Every creak of the cabin, every sigh of the wind through the frozen pines felt amplified, deliberate. I tried to focus on my notes and camera, but the scraping returned, this time from the far corner of the cabin. Slow, steady, deliberate. I approached cautiously, hands trembling. Shadows along the walls seemed unnaturally dark, curling toward me, almost solid. Then the whisper again, closer. "Elin." My blood ran cold. I shone the flashlight toward the corner, but there was nothing, just shadows moving independently of the light, curling along the floor, walls, and ceiling. I realized then the cabin had subtly changed. Hallways stretched farther than they should, corners appeared where none existed, and the floor pulsed slightly beneath my feet. Outside, the snow seemed to shift, forming tunnels and spirals I hadn't noticed before. A terrible truth sank in. I was trapped, and whatever was out there was studying me. I retreated to the fireplace, trying to calm myself. But the whispers grew louder, surrounding me. "Elin, come outside. Play." The cold pressed in through the walls and windows, thickening the shadows that now seemed to reach toward me like fingers. Looking through the frosted windows, I saw movement in the snow. Spirals and tunnels had formed, snaking around the cabin as though the forest itself had teeth. A pale, humanoid figure glided silently through the black pines. Its limbs bent unnaturally, glowing voids where its eyes should have been fixed on me. Inside, the cabin had subtly shifted. Hallways stretched farther than possible, corners appeared where none should exist, and the ceiling slanted downward. The realization hit me. The cabin wasn't just a place to stay. It was alive, a calculated trap. Every creak, every whisper, every ripple of the snow was part of its design, meant to terrify, to break, and perhaps to consume. I sank to the floor, shivering, knowing the night had only just begun. Hours passed, though I could no longer tell night from morning. The whispers pressed in from all sides. "Aelin, come outside." My hands shook as I tried to barricade the door and windows, stacking chairs and boxes, but the cabin subtly resisted. The furniture shifted, the floor creaked unnaturally, and the walls warped slightly. The snow outside moved in impossible ways, forming spirals and tunnels stretching closer to the cabin. The forest seemed alive, black pines swaying unnaturally despite the still air. I realized the terrifying truth. This wasn't just a haunted cabin. It was alive, calculating, patient, and it wanted me trapped. Every creak, every flicker of firelight, every whisper was a part of its design. I was no longer a visitor. I was prey. And the cabin, along with the forest beyond, studied my fear, bending reality around me to ensure my entrapment. The knowledge brought a cold, paralyzing dread that wrapped around me like ice. Panic consumed me. I crouched near the fireplace, shivering, as the whispers grew impatient. "Aelin, come outside, forever." The pale, faceless figure moved silently, limbs bending impossibly, glowing voids piercing the dim cabin light. Then came the scratching, not random, deliberate, clawing across walls and floor, forming patterns that seemed almost like letters. The cabin itself seemed to participate, alive and aware, subtly reshaping itself to prevent my escape. I grabbed my camera, hoping to capture proof, but it flickered and died instantly. The shadows thickened, pressing inward like living hands. I understood the cabin's purpose. It wasn't merely haunting me. It was studying me, molding me into part of its frozen, whispering essence. I sank to the floor, trembling, knowing the night stretched on endlessly. The whispers, the snow, the figure, they would not stop. Escape was impossible unless the cabin allowed it, and I could feel the terrifying intelligence behind its patience. By the 7th hour, I could feel my mind unraveling. The shadows moved independently, twisting and stretching along walls, floor, and ceiling, ignoring the flickering firelight. Every whisper became a command, insistent and urgent. "Aelin, come outside." I tried to stand, but the floor beneath me pulsed unnaturally, as if alive. The faceless figure had emerged from a corner I hadn't noticed before, taller than before, limbs bending in ways no human body should, gliding silently, glowing voids fixed on me. I understood then that the cabin was no ordinary building. It was alive, patient, calculating, feeding on my fear. Every subtle shift, the creaking floors, the flickering shadows, the distorted snow outside, was part of its design. I was no longer a visitor. I was prey, trapped inside a living nightmare, and every second of fear only deepened its hold over me. I retreated to the fireplace, desperate for warmth, for sanity. But the shadows pressed closer, curling and stretching like living hands. The whispers surrounded me, mocking and insistent. "Aelin, come outside. Forever." Through the frosted windows, the snow moved unnaturally, forming spirals, tunnels, and walls around the cabin. The pale, humanoid figure glided silently through the black pines, limbs bending inhumanly, glowing voids fixated on me. Inside, the cabin had shifted again. Hallways stretched impossibly, corners appeared where none should exist, and the ceiling slanted downward. It was alive, aware, a predator designed to trap and consume. Every sound, every flicker, every pulse of cold air was part of its plan to break me. I sank to the floor, trembling, knowing the night was far from over. Escape was no longer possible, and survival depended on understanding the cabin's terrible intelligence. and avoiding its relentless attention. Time had lost all meaning. The cabin pulsed with life, shadows twisting and crawling across every surface, independent of the firelight. The whispers pressed in from every corner. "Aylin, come outside. Join us." The snow outside shifted in unnatural ways, forming spirals, tunnels, and walls that seemed to move closer with every heartbeat. The faceless figure lingered at the edge of my vision, gliding silently, limbs bending inhumanly, glowing voids fixed on me. Each step I took brought me back to the same warped corner, the same echoing whispers, the same oppressive dread. Escape was an illusion, a cruel trick designed by a living, calculating predator. I understood then that the cabin and the forest were one entity. They weren't hunting me. They were absorbing me, folding me into their endless, icy hunger. I was no longer a guest. I was a part of their frozen world, trapped in shadows, whispers, and snow. A creature of fear destined to echo endlessly through the cabin. I am still here. Days, weeks, months, I cannot tell. The whispers never stop. They circle me endlessly, echoing from walls, floors, and ceiling. The faceless figure appears constantly, sometimes near, sometimes in warped reflections, glowing voids fixed on me. I understand now. I am part of it. The silent snowdrifter cabin is alive, a predator that absorbs victims into its frozen body. The snow, the forest, the shadows, they are all extensions of it. I am no longer Elin Varga. I am another whisper, another shadow, another echo within its endless hunger. If anyone finds a cabin deep in the frozen forest, heed this warning. It listens. It waits. And if it chooses you, it will not let go. Every night I hear whispers calling new victims. I am trapped. The cabin is patient, eternal, and merciless, and I am part of its dark, frozen legacy.